Look, I don't think that the worst things that are said are true, but like, you don't get in this situation that we got in if you like if you make all the right decisions. Like, if like if I'd been more careful, there's a billion things I could have done.
There was something about a backdoor that allowed you to execute commands that could alter the company's financial records without alerting others. That this was put in place. I think that was a Reuters article, which made it seem
Sure,
like you secretly were moving money in the background.
wait, and this is something that I would be doing?
It kind of said that SBF put like a secret backdoor so that he was moving funds to Alameda and it was undetected. Like this was something that you put into place potentially. I mean, that's how it read.
Well, that's interesting. So that I can tell you is definitely not true. I don't even know how to code, is the honest, embarrassing answer. I certainly wasn't like building some backdoor in the system. I could barely use the system. That's not true. I knew the system pretty well from a user interface perspective. But I literally never have opened the code for any of FTX. So I certainly didn't build a backdoor in there, and I don't know exactly what they're referring to. It's like, let me try and give you the nearest neighbor to that. The like thing that is true that like most resembles that statement, which is that there was a fuck up, which is a long and almost boring story, but basically, there was, I don't know if it's what that's referring to, but like I was wrong. I was incorrect on Alameda's balances on FTX by a fairly large number, an embarrassingly large one, and it was because of a like very poorly labeled accounting thing, which was a historical artifact of a time before when, like, from before FTX had bank accounts. And the result of that was basically there was a time way back yonder when people would wire money to Alameda and then ask to be credited on FTX. That just basically never got screwed up. And that was like a pretty big miss, and meant that Alameda was like substantially more levered than I thought it was. I don't know if that's what that comment's talking about, but that's the best thing I can, the sort of closest thing I can think of for it. It's possible that it went through a number of games of telephone before ending up like that. I don't know.
Then I guess just like the whole FTT thing, just using it as collateral and it being potentially pretty illiquid.
A lot of people use FTT as collateral on FTX. I think it had real value. That being said, there are a few problems. One of which was, again, the position's bigger than I thought it was. That wasn't good. Second of all, was that, and this is fucking embarrassing that I got wrong. Like, given my background, I should not have been the one to get this wrong. I think FTT was basically more legit than most tokens in some ways. Like, I think its value is more economically underpinned than the average, than the average token was. That being said,
why do you feel that way?
Wrong. Because like the buy and burn and shit. Like, it's not just like a token that like does nothing. Like it kind of, at least it does something, and like there is some like effectively cash flow that goes to it, and like there is a utility for it, and like I don't know, like you can use your judgment on how much you think that's worth.
Yeah.
But like you compare that to like token number 17 on CoinMarketCap. I don't know what token number 17 is, but I suspect it's just a lot less than FTT did. That being said, so I kind of feel like it did have real value. I mean, trade hundreds of millions of dollars a day, had, real market cap. And while it was like, I don't know, Alameda held a lot of it, it didn't hold all of it. Like half of it was just totally free floating.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I don't know, like you could reasonably, quibble over a factor of 2 on its like real liquidity. But not like a factor of like 30 or something. Like, we're talking a matter of like, I don't know, should have been X or like 1.23 times X or something. The bigger problem and the things that I like what actually happened there was not quite that FTT was illiquid. like, if you look at what happened between, a month ago, FTT's market cap was $8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Today, FTT's market cap is $500 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happened between then and now is not that a surprisingly small amount of sales of FTT totally crashed the price. Like, illiquidity wasn't what caused that crash. What caused the crash was something else, which is very embarrassing that I underestimated, which is the massive correlation of things during extreme market moves, especially when they're triggered by fear over the position itself and the massive size that those moves can be. And we've seen that again and again and again in finance, where, I mean, long-term capital, similar thing, where, like, you know, you have a bunch of positions which are correlated by virtue of all being held by the same entity. And in this specific scenario, where you have a crisis of confidence in that entity combined with a run on the bank and a total lack of liquidity and credit, where the crash can be extremely correlated between all those assets, extremely large and extremely fast.
Yeah.
And that's what we saw. Like, we saw over a 2-day period, FTT lose 90% of its market cap. We saw Solana lose half its market cap. And, like, Solana, that was a real token. And, it, like, to be clear, I don't think Alameda was selling Solana or FTT during this period. Like, this wasn't, like, the impact of a margin call. This was fear. Like, this was, all, like, you know, the reaction to news coming out specifically surrounding FTX and Alameda and their solvency, and you know, combined with the run on the bank on FTX, which basically meant that, like, you know, we saw moves that were, you know, 5 times as big as the biggest ever 2-day move for either of those assets in history. Which is, like, on the one hand, you could say, and then on literally the exact same day that they completely collapsed in value, a total run on the bank on FTX, where we saw $4 billion per day of customer withdrawals, which is 30 times what we see on a normal day. So on the one hand, you can say, well, that was like a 12 sigma event. How could we have predicted it? But that's what everyone always says. And of course, the answer is it wasn't a 12 sigma event, because everything's correlated in those events. Like, when you're and their tails are fatter than they appear. And, like, when you, like, the answer for how likely would that be, because that's what it would have taken to create this crisis. Like, if you really wanted to bring down FTX's liquidity, you needed to take 60% out of the market cap of a variety of moderately liquid tokens within a 2-day period and have more than 50% of all assets on FTX attempt to be withdrawn.
Yeah.
Like, that was the triggering condition. And that was, like, so many standard deviations outside of what you would normally expect, except, of course, like, that shit's correlated. And, like, that, you know, specifically when there's a crisis of confidence in the thing itself, you just see, like, you know, you see, once you've got a couple 2 sigma events, everything else follows.
Yeah.
With, like, high probability. And so it's like, you know, the stress test scenarios, so to speak, that I was thinking about were not nearly stressful enough. I was thinking about Luna crash type scenarios, which were bad, but weren't this bad because they weren't tuned to specifically the things that would bring down FTX.
I mean, do you feel it was problematic that it was such a large part of the balance sheet?
Yeah. Oh, so first of all, yeah. Well, sorry, or let me take that back. I think it was problematic that it was such a large margin position. Like, if you've got a lot of tokens sitting there doing nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're using them as collateral, right, then, like, then you've got to worry about concentration risk on the asset side. And so I think that was problematic. I also think, again, I should have been, like, way more worried about, like, extreme downside cases than I was. But also on top of both of those, I fucked up and, like, was incorrect about the size of the position by a shockingly large number until Sunday night when I recalculated it. Because of this historical accounting quirk, I was off by many billions of dollars on how big this position was.
So FTX International was separate from FTX US, and you had stated that FTX US was solvent. So I was wondering why FTX US had to go to Chapter 11 as well.
Oh, yeah. It's a really good question. Well, you can blame the fucking idiot you're talking to for actually filing this document. I was sort of coerced to doing it, but I should have just said no. I had that right. I probably would have been reported to everyone you could imagine for not doing it, but it would have been worth it because it's the right thing to do to not file. And like, I would give anything to unfile that right now.
You don't feel that FTX US should have filed for bankruptcy? And well, so if they are completely separate and FTX US was solvent, then would that mean that FTX customers would expect like a decent recovery? Just because I feel like all the numbers that have been floating around. Sorry?
FTX or FTX US?
US. Just because the only numbers I've seen floating around, like the Financial Times, the recovery looks pretty slim for...
That's very international.
Yeah.
US is 100%.
So then FTX US customers could potentially expect decent recoveries then after all this?
If the US team hadn't turned off the Amazon accounts, they could already be withdrawing. You know what the honest answer is? FTX US was so fucking solvent that even after losing like $250 million to a hack on the way to bankruptcy, it's still solvent. It's about $500 million over.
Withdrawals were opened first to citizens of Antigua or Bahamas, yes.
Bahamas.
Yes, and then the regulators or securities said that that was not approved.
Yeah, I think I might have decision. I think the right decision.
Wait, sorry?
It was... All right, so I ran it. I gave them a heads up, a one-day heads up that we were going to do it. They didn't say yes or no. They didn't respond, and then we did it. The reason I did it was it was critical to the exchange being able to have a future, because that's where I am right now, and you do not want to be in the country with a lot of angry people in it, and you do not want your company to be incorporated in a country with a lot of angry people in it. And so it was, realistically speaking, it's shitty, but like, yeah, the pathway forward for FTX involved Bahamians not being pissed at it.
Because I guess it could have been looked at as like insider withdrawal sort of thing.
Oh, it wasn't insider withdrawals. No, this was trying to create a regulatory pathway forward for the exchange.
Just to like kind of appease the citizens of the country that you're currently in, basically.
And that the company was about to be assigned a provisional liquidator. And I donated to both parties. I donated about the same amount to both parties this year. That was not generally known because despite Citizens United being literally the highest profile Supreme Court case of the decade and the thing everyone talks about when they talk about campaign finance, for some reason, in practice, no one can possibly fathom the idea that someone in practice actually gave dark. So, I don't know, all my Republican donations were dark. If you won't see them. And the reason was not for regulatory reasons. It's because reporters freak the fuck out if you donate to a Republican. They're all super liberal and didn't want to have that fight. So I just made all the Republican ones dark. But I was, whatever, second or third biggest Republican donor this year as well. But also, it's all for the primaries. They didn't give anything in general elections. They don't give a shit about general elections. It's not what matters. Like, it's the primaries where you have good candidates against bad candidates. The Ukraine one, I wish I could have pulled that off. I didn't fully understand the goal of it. I was helping Ukraine launder funds for the Democratic Party. I don't know why Ukraine's laundering funds for the Democratic Party. I don't know why they would. I don't know how they would. I don't know which funds they're laundering. I couldn't even tell what direction it was in. But I wished I was part of an international conspiracy that interesting. I don't know exactly who, because they shut off all access to the systems when it's halfway through exploring it. I've narrowed it down to like 8 people. I don't know which one it was. But I have a pretty decent sense. I think it is, again, either it was an ex-employee or someone installed malware on an ex-employee's computer. And I don't know for sure which of those it is, and I don't know for sure which one it is, because access is totally shut down right now, because it would be dangerous to allow people to carry data. lawyers chewed me the fuck out for that one. You know, the first thing they said after that was, they said, Sam, we have only one thing to tell you. You have to promise that you never, ever, ever say you fucked up again. I told them to go fuck themselves. I don't think they know what they're talking. I mean, whatever. They know what they're talking about in an extremely narrow domain of litigation. They don't understand the broader context of the world. Like, if you're a complete dick about everything, even if it narrowly avoids making moderately embarrassing statements, it's not helping anything.
I don't even know why you're talking to me. It's not like I'm some big reporter or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, I've started to trust my gut a little bit on things like this, and I don't necessarily always have a fully fleshed out reason for why, but there's some intuition that generated it, and if I had to unpack it in this case, I think it would be some combination of you were interested, you were, like, not sure what had happened, but you cared what had happened. And, like, there's no point in talking to someone who doesn't care what actually happened, because I'm like, how are you going to, like, have any impact from doing that? You're someone who, like, some people listen to, and, like, and I think, like, you were not just going to be, like, an obvious, like, shill for me or anything. Like, you sort of, like, because of the Mishinsky thing, like, I think I don't know, it just sort of felt to me like, I don't know, here's someone who, like, will approach this from at least a somewhat neutral and interested vantage point. And, you know, and who isn't, I guess the other thing, the other piece of it was, in addition to that, there are a lot of people who are kind of approaching it, there are reporters who are doing that, who are approaching it from a sort of neutral vantage point. And I am talking to some of them. The problem is that at the end of the day, their metric is clicks. Like, that's what they need to get. And it's fine. It is what it is. But, like, what it means is that, like, a boring story won't sell. And so they're going to be trying to ask me, like, the most provocative possible questions. And, you know, it's whatever. It is what it is. But, like, it is a little bit of a perversion on sort of what's going on. And, like, you know, I sort of had, like, I don't mind them that much, but, like, I kind of felt like, all right, like, we as a society have, in my opinion, my humble opinion, spent about enough time this week trying to figure out whether anyone in living in Albany was polyamorous. And I sort of, like, I don't know, I feel like I've answered that question a lot, and the answer is too boring for people to, like, believe. And so they just, like, keep coming at it from different angles. And I was sort of, like, not in desperate need of, like, that approach. It's interesting. It's interesting how much everything matters, and how everything matters, including the things that, like, the obvious things matter an enormous amount, but so do the non-obvious things too. You know, there's, like, this whole long saga of it, and then there's, like, a dumb fucking account that we labeled confusingly 4 years ago, and that was, like, 2/3 of the whole saga. Mm-hmm. And by numbers, and, like, then the saga ends, and I honest to God believe if I hadn't filed for bankruptcy, all users would be whole and withdrawals would be on FTX right now. And not just US, international as well. And I might still get there. We'll see. I don't know. It might happen, it might not. But 8 fucking minutes after I filed for bankruptcy, $4 billion more came in of liquidity.
Are you able to add it to the estate?
I'm working on it, but the current trustees of the estate would rather burn it all to the ground out of shame and attempt to find a way to bring more value to customers. So right now I'm stuck in a jurisdictional battle between countries over the bankruptcy estate that I started.
Would you put it in FTX International or US?
Oh, yeah, US doesn't need it.
Yeah.
US is fine.
Yeah.
That just needs to come out of bankruptcy and turn on. International needs, like, about $4 billion of net asset value, realistically speaking, and about $8 billion of liquidity. And these are big numbers, but they're not insurmountable numbers. And if that was the only blocker, I would be there right now. Right now, the hardest piece of this is actually just like undoing other random bits of damage that have happened to be able to get us to the point where we can address the fundamental underlying problem, which at this point I've like already 2/3 solved.
Do you think the numbers that have come out are pretty accurate on what people can expect? Like the FT or Financial Times balance sheet kind of looked like people could expect basically nothing on international.
Well, I mean, not nothing. Like, I think, sorry, that's not counting like just liquid assets that are there. I think if nothing happens, if I can never do anything again and they're left to their own devices, eventually US will get a penny on the penny, a dollar on the dollar once they get around to admitting that. And international will get, I don't know, 20, 25 cents on the dollar. So I don't know exactly what, something like that. But I don't know, that's because they got $4 billion sitting here waiting to be injected. If anyone will let us inject it. So.
Well, then, so are you kind of hopeful that FTX US or FTX International can just like turn back on at some point? Because obviously, Chapter 11 is restructuring, so you technically could restructure and reopen in the future. Is that your goal?
They sent me the AWS key beyond tomorrow, and withdrawals would start opening up over the next month. But right now, I'm fighting over an AWS key. We'll see. We'll see what I can do. I mean, the embarrassing thing is I was the one who filed. Like, it wasn't even that I'm trying to, like, usurp someone else's company. I'm trying to usurp my own company. And from the process that I myself started. So and the people who I myself put in charge grudgingly are not happy about that prospect.
So I've been trying to figure out the best way to relay information from my phone calls with Sam, but obviously a lot of nuance and tonality gets lost in Twitter threads. So I figured the most fair and accurate way to represent Sam's responses would be by letting people listen to the audio itself. Just to be clear, I am fully aware that Sam has full incentive to represent himself in as positive a light as possible, so I do take a lot of his answers with a grain of salt, especially without hard evidence. Also, I did provide more context in a previous video, but just to be clear, I am not an official journalist or a reporter. This was my first time interviewing literally anyone ever, and it was fucking Sam Bankman-Fried. So I apologize if I didn't ask the questions that you would have asked. I didn't have a lot of notice for this phone call, so I didn't really have questions lined up. This phone call took place at about 3 a.m. on November 16th, and we had a second phone call on November 20th, so I will post that shortly on my YouTube channel. Anyway, I hope you're all having a lovely day. I'll leave my contact information in the description box down below, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.